Thank you for tuning into Literary Blend, a publishing podcast. I'm your host, Demi Michelle Schwartz. There's no perfect recipe for chasing a dream in the publishing industry, but I hope the conversations on this show give you the ingredients you need to bake yours into reality. So let's flip the page and get into this chapter of Literary Blend. Hello, friends. Welcome back to Literary Blend. Today's chapter is called A Peek into Picture Books. And joining me on the show to chat all things picture books is an author I'm beyond delighted to chat with. Please welcome Stephanie Henson. Hi, Stephanie.
Hi, how are you?
I'm fantastic. How are you?
Good. Thanks so much for having me on. I love your podcast.
Oh, thank you. And I'm so excited to have you on the show. This is going to be a delightful conversation. I can't wait to get into it. But first, can you please share with everyone a little about yourself and your journey in the publishing industry so far?
Sure. So I am from Westchester, Pennsylvania, and I live here with my husband and my two kids and my two dogs. I'm originally from New Jersey, where I went to school at Rider University, and I have a degree in communications from Rider and a publishing and professional writing certificate. I've always written. I was a journalism major in college. I fell into marketing after college and did a lot of marketing copy and things of that nature. So writing has always been on my radar. Writing for children is something that I've always wanted to do. And I actually tried to do that a little bit in my 30s and just, had a little bit of a challenge juggling that with early motherhood. I had small kids at the time, and I just admire anyone who's really able to find that right balance of, writing and submitting and editing and doing all that while tending to young children. So I kind of put it on the back burner for a little while and revisited it in my 40s during the pandemic, which a lot of people have similar stories, but, revisited that in my 40s a few years ago. Kind of started with kids' poetry, middle grade, and before I really concentrated on picture books and got my first publication credits through my, children's poetry writing. And just kind of found a rhythm from there. Found, the Twitter X community, which is really, really beneficial in, guiding your writing journey and aligning with the right people, and just interacting with everyone has just given me such a sense of, inclusion and, being able to, heighten my craft that way. So I think that's pretty much it in a nutshell, how I've kind of stumbled upon, writing for kids.
That's fabulous, and I completely agree. I think the writing community on Twitter is fabulous, and I think it's so cool how you try different things. You did the poetry, and you did middle
Hmm.
grade as well, and then either way, like, you always had a passion for writing for children,
Yes.
and I think that's super special.
Thank you.
So why do you think you love writing for children so much?
I don't know, just their perspective on things and the way that they approach situations. It's just so innocent. And I feel like you could really reach them at such a formative period of time in their lives. And you could, I don't like to be too lesson oriented in what I write. But giving them that just grasp on like different opportunities and exposing them to different things and different cultures and different perspectives, I think is so important, for young kids. And it's it can be so challenging trying to write for young kids because you really have to find that rhythm, and you have to write it in a way that they can understand. You can't have vocabulary that's too, beyond what they're able to comprehend. And it's not as easy as, people tend to think it is to write picture books. I think it's definitely difficult, and you definitely have to be mindful of your audience because, they're future readers. You want to grab them when they're young. You want to, instill this lifelong, just beauty of writing and the written word, and you want them to kind of grasp that. And that's an important job as picture book writers.
Absolutely. I 100% agree with you. I definitely think that kid lit in general, like picture books, middle grade, even YA that I write, I think people think like, oh, writing for kids and teens is easier than adults, but I don't know if I necessarily agree with that. I mean, everything has its challenges, but when you have that age range, whether it's the picture book age category or YA, you're writing for an audience that they're at some kind of pivotal point in their life. They're just kind of trying to learn and get to know the world around them. And for the teenagers, that's when they're in that transition period from, maybe believing everything their parents told them to breaking out and discovering who they are and making their own opinions for themselves, and that transition from teen into adulthood. So there are many experiences that this entire range of kids and teens experience that we need to authentically represent in our stories to create that reader connection. And especially for picture books, like, I write short stories, and it's so hard for me, even if it's like 4,000 words. I'm like, how can I tell this story in 4,000 words? And for picture books, you have like a much smaller word count range. So, like,
I was just
shout
going to say
out.
that. Yeah, I mean, there's an economy of words that you're working within. There's a structure that you're working within. I mean, you want to make sure that everything flows and everything makes sense, and you have limited amount of space in order to do that. And you have to be impactful with every word you choose. And you have to kind of leave room for like illustration interpretation as well. I mean, I'm not an illustrator myself, but I think it's important when you're writing out your picture book to kind of, understand where to leave an art note or where the page turn might be to make it like so impactful for the reader to get to the next page and to kind of have that wow moment when they turn the page. So, I mean, there's a lot more to it than people kind of, understand at first. And just again, like, I'm a prolific writer. So it's really hard for me to stay within that 500 word count target that they like you to stay within for picture books. I mean, some of mine are a little bit over. I write lyrically, so there's a lot of description, there's a lot of imagery associated with what I write. And I'm always in the back of my mind thinking to myself, like, kids are going to get bored, or I might lose them at this point. So it's very it's just you have to be mindful of how you're approaching a story for children, especially
Right.
young kids for picture books, because that age range for picture books is normally in that 4 to 8 is the sweet spot. 4 to 10 you can get away with, but I like to say that 4 to 8 is that sweet spot for picture book audience.
Right, fabulous. And we will talk more about illustrations a little later, but
Hmm.
just one more thing on the word count situation. I'm sure like it's really down to word choice and making sure
Yes.
every single word counts. And when you are working on your middle grade work, do you find that you're more, easily able to tell more concise stories and not have all those filler words and things you don't need because of your experience with writing concisely for picture books?
I think that there's definitely a correlation. My middle grade that I've been writing recently has been in verse. So it's
Oh,
very
wow.
much based in poetry.
That's so
It's
interesting.
very, emotionally resonant. So it's pretty much the same thing with writing in verse. Like every word that I choose has to have meaning, has to have a place. Share Fair Famous, which is my middle grade that came out in June, that was written in prose. That was written before I really got my feet wet in lyrical and poetry writing. So that, I mean, I was able to crank that out very easily because it was just, just following the trail in my brain and just getting everything out on the page. And, I went back and edited later. I wasn't really super mindful of the word choices with that. Whereas when I'm writing in verse now, everything has to have an emotional, currency to me. Everything has to matter. And it's very much like that when I write picture books.
That's fabulous. So interesting. Perfect. So now let's dive into some specific elements with the picture books. And first is the character. So you can have human characters, animal characters, but either way, the character is central to the story, as in any story. So, what are your general thoughts on tips for crafting a compelling character for a picture book?
Well, it's funny because I took a webinar with Pat Zietlow Miller, and she is New York Times bestselling picture book author. And it was, a webinar on lovely lyrical language and the plotless picture book. So a lot of what I wrote early on were just kind of very poetic, almost like poems that were set to a story, didn't really have a strong central character. Um, Overarching themes such as, very SEL based, like social emotional learning, I am enough, or this is my story, and things of that nature, where there wasn't really a strong character hook. And when I was writing No School, My Rules, I went ahead and kind of created the character that didn't want to go to school, and what emotions she was feeling and what expressions she might have said, and things of that nature. So I think it could go either way. I mean, there are definitely picture books that don't have that strong character arc, that I've written in the past. And then I have No School My Rules that has, the character who goes through the story and has this, these playful scenarios of why she doesn't want to go to school and how that affects her, and trying to write that in a way that kids can relate to is definitely something that I wanted to do.
Oh, for sure. I'm so happy you brought up the relatability because I was actually going to bring that up. I think, with these picture books, when these kids are getting introduced to different parts of the world or different experiences that maybe they've experienced or they will soon experience, like going to school for the first time or things like that, I think you're letting them into the life of a character who may be feeling the same way. And through seeing that character overcome whatever obstacle they're facing and
Yes.
solve the problem that they're trying to face, I think just like with any book, it gives you some kind of, motivation, like, hey, like that's like me, I could do this too.
Right. And just, more on like character development, characters in picture books. I attended a conference in February. It was the SCBWI virtual winter conference. I actually won a scholarship for that, which was very exciting. And it had access to all the keynote speakers, and there was an editor panel, and they talked about picture books and what they've traditionally seen in picture books the last few years versus what they want to see. And kind of with what I talked about earlier, kind of books with no plot, SEL based narratives, things like that they were seeing before that were really popular. They kind of want to go in a different direction and deal with more character driven stories for picture books. So they want that strong character, they want that diversity, they want kids represented in different ways through different characters, more so than just like the plotless, I am enough kind of narrative that we've seen a lot in picture books the past few years. They want more traditional storytelling, which I thought was interesting when I, was a part of, looking at that panel online.
That is so interesting, and thank you for sharing that too. I think it's just so fascinating in general seeing how books and the approaches that readers and publishers are seeking have,
Sure.
shifted since
Oh,
when
sorry.
I was a kid till now. Like they're so different.
Right. Like, when I was a kid, I was thinking about the types of picture books that my mom used to read to me. And it was very like cartoon character based. There were like books based on TV shows that she read a lot to me, and like, the Care Bears or Strawberry Shortcake
Oh
or,
my god, I
My
love
Little
the Care
Pony,
Bears.
that kind of stuff. And, I think that's very popular right now. Like Bluey is a character on Disney that is super popular right now. And they have books and merchandise and all of that. And I think, the throwback to traditional storytelling is something that the editors, want to see. And I don't really recall in my childhood. I mean, I know she read Ferdinand. That was the story of the bull. That's something that I remember from my childhood. But I just remember all of these like TV focused books that she would read to me. And, I feel like no matter what it is, as long as you're getting books and stories in the hands of kids, it's going to resonate, because I'm in my 40s and I still remember that she did that. And I still remember our story times kind of cuddled up together on the chair and, learning to tell time from the Care Bears, like,
Yeah.
things like that. So I
Yeah.
think, there's so many different ways to tell a story and ways to approach it when you're talking about picture books. I don't think that there's any right or wrong way to do it. You just have to kind of make sure that you're grabbing their attention. You're using different literary devices to kind of make the text interesting, and just go from there.
Yeah, no, for sure. And I'm super happy you brought up the read aloud aspect because I was actually going to bring that up as well. Like, when we think of picture books, it's not like the kids are reading them themselves, their
Hmm.
parents are reading them
Yep.
aloud. And so that creates a bonding moment. And also, back to the word choice and alliteration, rhyme, and all the things, it's whenever someone is reading the story aloud, it has to have that engaging tone as well.
Yeah, I always try to weave poetic devices in what I'm writing. I'm not a great end rhymer. I'm not a good traditional rhymer from start to finish, but I'll definitely incorporate some internal rhyme in
Right.
there. There are places where definitely onomatopoeia is incorporated. I love alliteration. It's
Hmm.
probably my favorite. I have to be careful not to
Yeah.
overuse it sometimes, but I think I have a little checklist when I'm writing just to make sure I'm hitting on different things. And did I incorporate a simile? Is there a metaphor that I can maybe throw in here that can they can relate to when they're reading, and just try to make it as lush and layered as I can, because I think it just makes for a more memorable reading experience that way.
For sure. And it gives the story rhythm as well as it's
Yes,
being read
absolutely.
aloud. And this is just so fascinating to me because, again, like as writers, no matter if we're writing for picture books or YA or adult, we're using these different devices, similes,
Oh,
metaphors in our
absolutely.
writing. And it's just so cool how no matter who we are as authors and the age categories we're writing for, we're still pulling on the same tips and tricks to make those stories immersive.
Yep.
Fabulous. So now I want to chat about plot. So when we think of novels, novels have layers and layers of plots and subplots and all the things. But for picture books, I'm assuming they should be super, super straightforward from the ones I've read. So what are your thoughts on creating a compelling plot that's not overly complicated?
Well, I think in just my opinion, I think if you have too many characters in your picture book, I think you're setting yourself up for some complication. You want that story arc to be kind of fluid. You want to follow the one character. She can encounter other people, but I don't think you want to make their arcs too strong. Just kind of following the main character, situations they might encounter, people they might encounter, streamlined, simple. Whereas with middle grade, when I write middle grade, I have backstories for like everybody that character might have encountered, which with picture books you can't really do that with the space and the word restrictions that you're given. But I think you can make plot very interesting, by doing that.
Right, and I also love how, like in many picture books that my mom read to me when I was younger, it's exactly what you said. You're following a character, but they're interacting with others. Like,
Yes,
say it's a little animal going through a forest where they're going to interact with different forest animals during their journey, but they're
right,
not taking the spotlight of the story.
exactly.
So now let's chat about themes. So what kind of themes do you typically like to write about in your books or any kind of marketable aspects that you've heard from publishers or others at what themes that publishing is leaning toward that they would like to see in picture books?
Well, social and emotional learning was a big one for me. It's not a secret. I've shared this before, but I've been bullied in my past. It was really bad for me in high school, but I think everybody has that moment where you don't fit in, or you feel like you don't fit in, and people kind of exploit you for that. And so a lot of what I write is social and emotional learning based. Diving in from those experiences that I had. Anything that deals with bullying or managing your emotions or coping, those are themes that I really like to write about. I've recently gotten into info fiction, and that's a subcategory that a lot of editors I find are very interested in. It's kind of a mix of fiction and nonfiction on a particular topic. I think that's very cool to write. Like, you can research different things. Like, right now I have a picture book on submission about sea glass and how sea glass is made in the ocean. So I kind of drafted that story from the lens of a science fair and a science fair project, and doing some research about how is sea glass produced in the ocean, can you replicate it at home, and kind of took the idea from there. So there's definitely a lot of trends with picture books. Another one, I think I've touched on it before, is culture and diversity. Kids want to see themselves reflected in what they read. So anything that, based around holidays or based around food choice, something like that, as it relates to a certain culture or subset of people, I think is very attractive to editors right now.
So much fabulous insight. You are a superstar. I'm learning so much from you.
Thank you. I mean, I'm trying. I mean, there's so much, and depending on where you go for your information, it could change. But like I said, Society of Children's Writers and Illustrators (SCBWI), that's a resource that I rely on a lot. Highlights Foundation is a great place to go when you're looking for craft insight or advice. just, picking your sources and making sure that you're, absorbing yourself in the right information. Children's book review is a good one. I'm trying to think where else I go for my Publishers Weekly, to get your information about publishing and trends and things of that nature.
Fabulous. Well, now let's shift gears and talk about illustrations. I'm so excited to hear all about this. So, you mentioned that you don't illustrate your own. And so, I'm super curious how an author gets paired with an illustrator and how much input you have when it comes to the kinds of illustrations and the story, if there's any back and forth with giving notes, and the process in general of seeing that book come to life with the illustrations.
So basically, I'm just going to go off of my experience. So my picture book, No School, My Rules, is being published by Tealmore Press, and they are a small independent press. They are fabulous. I can't say enough great things about them. So when I first signed, when we were going through the vision of the book, they sent me a questionnaire. And I'm not sure if it's like this, across the board, if authors have input on illustrations. I think it depends from publisher to publisher. But with my experience, I was given a questionnaire, and it was, what kinds of art do you like? Are there any picture book covers that you particularly, gravitate towards? What is your style when it comes to, picking colors? Like just these random questions about just trying to get an aesthetic for the book. So I answered the questionnaire, sent it back to the publisher. They took that and they matched my answers with an illustrator that they thought would be the most appropriate for my book. So the illustrator on my book, her name is Mai Tran. And I've never met her in person. I've never spoken to her in person, but the publisher, worked directly with the artist, kind of going off of the feedback that I gave them on that survey on, the types of picture books that I was interested in. They did ask me if I had any illustrators in mind, and I don't have that depth of knowledge where I'm super familiar with, a lot of the illustrators, but I did give illustrator names that were on the book covers that I did like. But they, had their process for choosing an illustrator, and they chose Mai, and she is, I'm finding the words hard to describe how amazing I think she is. She took my words and she elevated them to a place where I'm just so happy with what she came up with. I'm so excited for everyone to see the art spreads. There were so let me back up a little bit. In the very beginning, I did see the initial spreads that were just kind of pencil sketches of where the direction she was going and where she thought, my words were going to take her on her creative journey. And I really didn't have anything to say of what she did because she took everything and, she did such a great job. And there might have been a spread where I was like, oh, I alluded to sunshine in the text, maybe we can put a sun on this spread, like little notes like that. But it was nothing where I thought to myself, where I had any business, kind of in intruding on her process or what she had done. And we took the pencil sketches. She went to real spreads. I saw the spreads. I approved them. It was just a very fluid process. Like there wasn't a lot of back and forth. There wasn't a lot of changes. I think I just got very lucky with the illustrator that they chose. And like I said, I think it differs from publisher to publisher, but again, I was given a survey. I saw the initial spreads. I saw the color spreads. I gave my feedback here and there, but I wasn't giving art notes. I wasn't giving, a lot of direction because I'm so not artistically gifted. Not at all. Like I can't even draw a stick figure. I mean, it's just bad. But I feel like I stay in my lane. I write the words and, I kind of just make sure that everything makes sense from, pairing the words to the illustrations. Like I said, with incorporating the sun, because there was a sun that was mentioned on the one spread and we didn't have a sun. So just like little things like that. But I would never go ahead and, try to say like how to draw something or what to put in from an illustrator's point of view. I feel like that's their job and their lane, and that's what they can bring to the table.
Yeah, that sounds like such a cool process. Like it must have been the coolest thing to see your story come to life like that.
Oh, I jumped up and down. I think I shed a tear. I mean, it was great. It was really great. I really can't wait for the book to come out.
Yeah, that's so exciting. I'm so excited for you.
Thank you.
Yeah, for sure. So, just to wrap up our chat on picture books, what are some final thoughts you would like to share?
Um, I don't know. I think I definitely have my favorites. I have, authors who I admire, and I have mentor texts that I use all the time when I'm writing my books. Like Jessica Whipple is one of my favorites. She has a book called I Think a Lot, which I mean, if I could have written a book in that way, that would have been the book I would have written. I mean, she took her personal experience of, having OCD and anxiety, and she wrote a picture book that kids like. I feel like this book is just needed, and I needed this book when I was a kid. Pat Zietlow Miller is a hero of mine. She wrote When You Are Brave. I feel like I comp that book a lot because a lot of what I write has to do with feelings of courage and dealing with situations that are beyond your control. So When You Are Brave is a great book, for kids to read on those topics. But just picture books in general, I think, are coming such a long way. The illustrations are just so dynamic, and they tell the story. I feel like just the inclusion aspect of everything, the focus on diversity and culture, and making sure that every kid is seen, and making sure that every kid's experiences are reflected in the books that we read, I think are so important. And I feel like picture books, they are important because we're grabbing these kids and we're making them lifelong readers, and we are their first stop on that journey. So I don't take that responsibility lightly. I feel like I have to do the best that I can for these kids so they'll keep coming back for more.
Perfect. What an inspiration. This was a total delight. Thank you so
Oh,
much for
thank
joining me.
you.
You are so welcome. And now we have reached the plot twist where I'm
Ooh,
going to ask you a fun question you could have never seen coming. Are you ready?
okay, yes.
All right, cool, cool. So, what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you two genres, and I want you to tell me what ice cream flavor you think best represents the genres.
I've never been asked this question. I love it.
All right, so your two genres are fantasy and romance.
Ooh, fantasy and romance. So for romance, I have to pick an ice cream flavor that I think represents romance.
Yeah,
Hmm. I don't know. The first thing that came to my mind on that was
me
strawberry.
too.
It's
Yeah.
so sweet and like, universal, and you love it, and it's pink. And this is the craziest question. And fantasy, like I was hoping you were going to ask me YA because I would be like Rocky Road for sure. But fantasy, huh? Something like Midnight Carmel River or something like with depth and dimension and like I don't know layers. Does that make sense?
Yes, and maybe some rainbow sprinkles.
Yes, or something like that. I always think of fantasy. I don't know, like why I think of it as just like outer space. I don't know why I think that way, but yeah, maybe some sprinkles. I don't know, but definitely for middle grade and YA, I would say Rocky Road because I think those kids go through it and they have to, manage certain situations that definitely aren't smooth. So I know I kind of answered a question you didn't ask, but
That's
it was
perfect.
fun.
Fabulous. Well, before we go, I would love you to share where everybody can connect with you online and check out your work.
Sure. So I primarily live on X Twitter. So my handle is STEPHA_Henson, HENSON. So it's Steph A. Henson at Twitter. It's also Steph A. Henson on Instagram. I post sporadically on Instagram. And my website is stephanie-henson.weebly.com. So, and then the books, Share Fair Famous, can be found wherever books are sold: Amazon, Barnes and Noble, Walmart, Target, online. And then No School My Rules, I think, is going to be available primarily on Amazon. And that they're both available now. You can order Share Fair now, and No School My Rules is available for pre-order right now before it comes out in August.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much again for joining me for a fabulous conversation about picture
Thank
books.
you. I appreciate it. It was fun. Thank
Yeah,
you.
for sure. It was super fun. And listeners, that is a wrap on this chapter with Stephanie called A Peek into Picture Books. If you enjoyed our conversation, please consider leaving Literary Blend a review and giving it 5 stars to help others just like you discover it. Also, if you have friends in publishing you think would enjoy the show, please pass it along to them. Thank you for listening, and until we flip to the next chapter, happy reading and writing.